Hi everybody, my name is Ben Miller. I'm a member of the board of the Schwules Museum in Berlin and a writer and a researcher, and I'd like to welcome you to this panel, which is part of Cocktail d'Amore and Conversation, which is a two-day series of events curated by myself and Dr. Joao Florencio from the University of Exeter about queer bodies and queer spaces and how those things intersect with the nightlife scene in Berlin, of which Cocktail d'Amore is, as we all know, a crucial part. Thank you so much for joining us here online. This panel was originally supposed to take place outdoors, but due to a rain warning, we had to cancel it, and thanks to the kindness of Tim Wildemann and the other wonderful people here at Schwutz in Neukölln, where we're filming, we're able to bring it to you online. And so today we're going to be talking about race and migration and the real estate market in Berlin, how those things intersect with one another, how those things intersect with nightlife, how nightlife can be part of the problem, how nightlife can be part of the solution, and also about some of the really exciting things that are going on in terms of activism in this city, both for racial justice and for housing justice and the Berlin tenants movements, which are becoming, I think, a model for a lot of other cities around the world. Before we go any further, I want to give the two panelists that we've invited to join us, who are both wonderful and brilliant. We thank them so much for sharing their ideas and their time with us tonight. And I'll start here with Edna on my left. If you could introduce yourself and tell us who you are and maybe how you found your way to Berlin, because all of us are, as most Berliners are, and I think have been for a long time, Berliners in some sense by choice.
So my name is Edna Bonhomme, and I'm a historian, writer, and activist. And I first came to Berlin in 2012 on a whim in between archival work while I was doing my PhD from Cairo. And I was very much fascinated by the music scene. I loved seeing the graffiti all over the city. It reminded me of my hometown in Miami. And I also appreciated how diverse certain communities such as Neukölln and Kreuzberg were. So I was really activated by that spirit, as well as the anarchist squatter scene that I saw present, something that was very much fueling my anarchist heart at the time. And so there were multiple times from 2012 and the time that I moved here in 2017 that I would visit. But 2017 became a moment when I decided I would come to Germany because unfortunately, Donald Trump had gotten elected as president and chief of the United States of Anarchy. So I wanted to escape, especially as someone who was living in Brooklyn at the time and seeing the growing xenophobia that was happening in the US, the Islamophobia, the just anti-Blackness was very much weighing on my soul. So Berlin became a place that I could escape to, while also being the only place that I was able to find a job. So that was a key element. And since then I've had different kinds of feelings about Berlin, and I think I've had to do a lot of learning and unlearning about the history of Berlin, about the history of Roma people, the Afro-German experience, as well as Germany's role in colonizing the African continent. Like, this is a place that has taught me so much about things I did not learn in school, and how I'm just a student of the world by being here.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for joining us. And now, Muhammad here on my right, maybe the same question.
Well, I want to be an artist and I want to be a writer. So this is what I do in life, and I'm occasional DJ here and there. I'm more retired DJ nowadays. I had my years in that too, but I was actually I'll go just hearing the years mentioned. So I think my love-hate relationship with Berlin started with a big fascination between 2008 and 2012. I was frequently here visiting, trying to find my place in, or trying to even come here, live here. But I was actually very frequently visiting for political conferences, for literature readings. I was writing also back at the time, and also for DJing sessions. but then I just didn't visit, only one visit in 2016. My life took another course, and I was actually more established back home. And then in 2018, my wife got a postdoctoral fellowship here, and we moved. And it's been, since then, 3 years, trying to do my fantasy of being engaged with the city from as a resident.
And you're part of a collective in Kreuzberg, if I'm not mistaken. Do you want to speak a bit about the collective and say what it's called? And this is something we can link to their information, I think, in the video for people who are listening.
Cool. I'm part of Al Berlin collective. In Arabic, it means the people of Berlin, and it's basically a collective interested in promoting the contemporary moment of West Asia and North Africa, and music and arts that have a relation to the contemporary moment of the region. Actually, like, we got a few years after landing here, in a beginner's luck, we got funded by Music Board Berlin, and we did our first festival on a focus on Arab music from the region that's connected to the Arab Spring. We had Lekhfa from Egypt in Yam as a main act, surrounded by also some Lebanese acts and some Syrian acts. And we managed, actually, even through the first year, to produce some more than 10 events with also local artists, with artists from Lebanon, Egypt, and North Africa. Of course, that was before the pandemic in a year, and then came the pandemic. Now we run a cultural space in Kreuzberg. We have a co-working space, a cafe, and a bar. And hopefully we're doing the second edition of the festival this autumn in Festsaal Kreuzberg.
Amazing. Well, hopefully, I mean, assuming that we all don't get devoured by the Delta variant, maybe that's something that people could check out. So, to maybe begin grounding the conversation in kind of both of your experiences or in our kind of collective experience, both of you, as I also came a bit starting in the mid-2010s, here and out, and then it was 2016, actually just about exactly 5 years ago today that I made the leap. But how, as both of you have been organizing, both in the sense of organizing events and participating in different kinds of politics, whether that be movement-oriented politics or collective spaces, how have you seen the city and those spaces changing over the past few years, is the first part of the question, and then into the pandemic, which obviously throws another whole wrench into everything, especially anything that's kind of live or collective.
I guess I can answer, or do you want to answer?
No, you could start. I just want to say it's a
no problem.
big scoop.
It's a big question, but hopefully we don't have to answer it all now. Hopefully we can. I don't want to just like Oprah style ask questions and then get neat answers. Hopefully we can kind of be very broad, and then we can kind of drill in as things come up.
Yeah, I think those are obviously large questions, and depending on how the wind blows, I can answer it in multiple ways. I would say that in terms of like how the city was, or how I've experienced it in the beginning, I think at the core of my soul and spirit, I'm a nerd. So unfortunately, I love to read and gather with people by reading. And so when I first landed, I actually created a reading group, and we would just like read Aimé Césaire and Frantz Fanon and Rosa Luxemburg, and really for me that was important to like have a radical reading group to gather like-minded individuals, because when I think of Berlin and leftist movements that had began here in the city, I wanted to recreate that somehow, and I wanted to actually understand the space by using theory to move through the city as much as possible. And at the same time, it also became a mechanism by which I could like then organize with people. So I organized with people in Frauenstreik and a women's strike, as well as other migrants who came specifically from the African continent, Latin America, and elsewhere. And it's in that kind of, whether it was a collective space or even just, figuring out what a demo would look like, that you learn to create this place and make it home. And that's what came from me, like the idea or the sense that I could trust and depend on others and others could depend on me. And that, home isn't just a place that you call it, it's a process of actually forming and forging relationships. That being said, the city has undergone so many rapid changes, and even the neighborhood that we're sitting in terms of rising surge in rental prices, buildings, and specifically bookstores and such being evicted, and people not being able to stay in a place because of affordability. People often call this gentrification, and the displacement of individuals because capital demands it or capital is so aggressive. But it also comes with other tensions too, because those who are coming from the global south, those who are people of color, tend to be the ones with less secure housing, and that is made quite visible in terms of, and the pandemic became a situation in which a lot of friends I had who were specifically queer and migrant had instability and in their housing. And unfortunately, the excitement of Berlin and the comradely spirit, the anti-capitalist spirit that attracted me to this place is also becoming less and less difficult to sustain because of how aggressive housing policies have been. So, but at the same time, I've also seen some of the largest demonstrations in this city have been around questions around migration. So the Hanau Remembrance demo that happened here in Neukölln, very large. Renters demonstration that happened about a year and a half ago before the outbreak, also quite large. It was just, so I see the power of the people on the streets, which is quite refreshing. However, the extent to which that gets materialized in policy by the politicians who I can't vote for is another matter. So these are the tensions of like the spirit of the people that I interact with and who are my spirit animals versus the fact that we live in Germany.
We do, in fact, live in Germany. That's just to add a stat here. I think it's more than 25% of people who live in Berlin have absolutely no voting rights on the state, Berlin state, or German federal level. Some of those people are EU citizens who can vote for their little district council. So I guess you can vote to have a sidewalk put in. But in terms of the big questions, no. And those often, as you said, are the people who have the worst conditions on the housing market. Do you want to maybe address some of this before I talk anymore?
No, I'll just say, it's a big scoop question. So I'll just say that, like, in somehow there's no way of explaining how different the city is now from the first times I remember visiting. Like, if I remember the times between 2008, 2012, where I would be twice or three times a year visiting here, living a week here, a week there. In 2012, I managed to live for a month in December. I was invited to a city festival. Like, for example, you had only one bar in Weserstraße. One bar in Weserstraße. Now, now Weserstraße is a parallel universe to Zone in LA. Like, you just walk Zone in LA and you're in a certain universe, and you just pass the street and you're in a total time travel to another universe. And it's just two parallel streets. Like, when I lived very close to Weser, just east to the canal of Weser und Wilderbruch, and Weserstraße literally had one bar. And now it's a total universe of. So the changes to and also it took me years to understand that I wasn't really visiting Berlin, that I was basically visiting Neukölln, Kreuzberg. Like, till now, I don't really know much parts of the city. I know Neukölln pretty well, I know Kreuzberg pretty well. Like it's been years, but it's like in somehow, in really large parts of the city, I don't even know. And the attachment, like, and also during these 3 years I'm living here, the city went through, like, you could see transformation of the city daily. But not only, like, of course, it's mostly seeing the, like what I described on Weserstraße maybe shows the extent of the gentrification that happened during these years, or let's call it the transformation first, and then, gentrification depends. Gentrification for A's might be not gentrification for a B, and it's like there's levels and levels of who gentrifies who. And I think that's why Neukölln is a really interesting case in this sense, because it's not only the big companies that makes the effect, it's also lots of groups of people that I myself might be affiliated with or part of, And this, it's like me as a Palestinian in Neukölln, I'm in this, part of both groups in somehow. So also part of the gentrifiers somehow, just from my profession or my position in society. But on the other hand, somehow around me is some of the biggest Arab and Palestinian communities in Europe. So, and also the transformation, I think that's been, so many things changed in Neukölln. Like I remember Zoninale as being the main Arab experience back then, but nowadays you talk about the visibility after the Syrian refuge and after the Palestinian who came also with the Syrian refuge. The Arabization of the neighborhood, I think, is fascinating. I think it's not even paid attention to. I think it's, like one of these grassroots movement that overlooked by the city planning.
Of course.
And we could just go now to the Karl Marx Street and see the different, what the city is planning and actually what's happening on the street. It's two different things.
And I think
just
maybe
here
to the city,
down the street.
Some of the city planners may be the kind of German for whom the grandchildren of Turkish quote-unquote guest workers and Syrian refugees who came 3 years ago are the same. Like I don't think the difference is perceived at that level. And so you're right, it does remain undiscussed. One interesting thing, just to go into Neukölln a little bit, I guess I'll start by saying Cocktail de Mori is a queer event. We're in a kind of queer space. And that's, there are, I think, recently, in the past 10 years, a lot of queer things that have found their way into Neukölln as other neighborhoods have priced them out. Many of those queer things, but not all of them, but many of them are predominantly white, or at least normatively white. This then creates situations which are exploited by some of the very worst people in town to try to create divisions between a queer liberation that is understood to be white and a migrant community that is understood to be backwards. So the narrative so often about incidents or attacks that happen on the streets of Neukölln is, how could we possibly have a situation where our wonderful German white feminist and gay liberation, which as we all know is achieved, right? But how can we have a situation where we have, or the same thing happens with anti-Semitic attacks. I'm Jewish, how we have a situation where we've now imported queerphobia, we've imported anti-Semitism to Germany, importing anti-Semitism to Germany. It's like pretty funny, but people say this. And it's the kind of situation that gets created, like these interpersonal and intercommunity tensions that are real, get created then through this insane housing system and real estate system in which so many giant swaths of this city have been bought up by a relatively small number of companies, and more money, I think the statistic is that more money, more institutional and speculative investment money has gone into Berlin real estate in the past 10 years than Copenhagen, Amsterdam, and Paris combined. And and that's also really not discussed, because so often when gentrification as a process is discussed, it's spoken of as a process by which successive waves of slightly wealthier and therefore likelier to be white people and likely to be native-born people come into a neighborhood and push out the older group. But there's this other process that's happening behind this massive speculative bubble that's happening like behind it, underneath that, which is really fascinating. You had said in a conversation we had before this, something that I thought was really interesting that I wanted to invite you both to respond to, which is this idea, you say it's difficult, you said, because throughout your life organizing things both in Palestine and here in Berlin, you had sometimes found yourself in a situation where you had organized an event thinking that you were going to preserve or promote or save a scene or a culture, and what you found that you were doing instead was like packaging it and marketing it to another group of people almost unintentionally. And I thought that was a really fascinating observation, and I wanted to invite you to kind of expand on it and respond to it, and you as well if you have thoughts on this. So.
Well, I think, like it's the like it's actually the catch of producing, but I think, the situation, the urban scape, let's call it, is pretty different and pretty, like there is some similarities from working in Palestine or working here. But the thing is that once like the exotism attached to the multicultural cultural activity or cultural production, so it's also, you have exotism attached to it and added liberal value, yeah? So it becomes like a kind of so you produce events and you try to produce events, for example, in order to supply or let's call it, in order to supply, for example, an experience of a liberal Arab music audience experience. It's like for example, you think that this is a product or this is an experience that's basically in order to build a certain global South community around it, and this way you're producing a much more progressive society that you come from. The thing is that most probably with the added liberal value in this experience, it's going to be a conscious wash machine for many others, just to come and consume it in this exotism with this, mixture of this exotism experience and conscious relief of here we are supporting this multicultural, this radical global South initiative. And once this takes its form in a space, in an urban space, this means actually bringing much more strong people economically and culturally, or in a society, I mean culturally, into living in areas where they feel comfortable and they have this, also the liberal product, but also packaged in a much more exotic form. And then it actually drives the community you meant the activity at first to be meant for, driven out of the space. And this this circle is the vicious cycle. This death cycle is the most vicious circle of being a cultural activist. And it's almost inescapable, but like this is the catch you're trying all the time to run away from.
Yeah.
Or this is my experience of falling into this circle, into this vicious circle several times.
Do you have things to add on this?
Yeah, I guess I wanted to talk about a couple of things that have been mentioned, specifically around the question around the different parallel communities that live or kind of coexist, but not quite, within Neukölln and Kreuzberg and other multi-ethnic communities here in Berlin, where often people make the remark, Berlin is not Germany in the sense that somehow it is an exception to the rest of the nation state because of that 25% of people who have other passports and are not German citizens, or even the sense that, and I've heard the term cosmopolitan used to describe what's going on, but yet there's this tension of the fact that on Sonnenallee, where I used to live, and it is like what you describe, very much having the like Arab cafes, people are talking and buying, fruits and vegetables. It's very lively, and I really love it and enjoy it. And then you have natural wine bars on Besestrasse, and neither shall these two communities meet unless they're maybe in a grocery store or passing each other. And it begs the question, what does it mean for people to be living side by side and yet still alienated from each other? What does it look like to actually build communities in which people would and do then try to find acts of solidarity so that if someone's being evicted, that there can be a call to action, or even just like one of the things I found difficult is my friends who have children now, even in the playgrounds, there is somewhat segregation between different groups. And why does it start so early, even that level of separation? But then I guess this then relates to a broader thing of cultural activism, which is how do we create, this is a buzzword, safer spaces of play, of fun, that can try to at least address some of that with respect to dancing, cultural arts, block parties. Like in Brooklyn, every summer, like there were block parties where people just like blocked off the street and the neighborhood came together. And even if people didn't always speak to each other, they would, for that day, be put into a situation where they would engage in fun and activities. And I wish there were more of that happening in Berlin to really try to address some of these larger structural issues that can make people feel quite isolated from each other, even if they live in the same building. And this is, obviously that's not a solution, or that's not a problem that I as an individual can solve. It has to be a collective thing. But it makes me wonder about how do we enjoy and use space to dismantle some of those tensions.
Yeah, it's interesting. I want to go back to that in a second. I want to take a brief detour into the history of the city in order to get back to that. Again, we're having this conversation in the kind of framework of, or as part of an events program that's run by a queer dance party. All of us know, or should know, that dance music is a Black art form that is the evolution from and that is evolved from a centuries-long tradition of music making by and from and of and with the African diaspora. What I think a lot of people don't necessarily know is the extent to which there was Black involvement in the creation of this Berlin techno dance scene that we all know of in the 1980s and 1990s. There's someone who unfortunately right at the beginning of the coronavirus pandemic passed away, who I really wish was here for this conversation, named Mac Folks, rest in power Mac, who I know you know, Edna, I'm not sure if you did as well, but who would, and he's actually, the good news is that his reminiscences of this time are in a way that we can't quite talk about being collected, and something's happening, so we'll be able to access them more directly. Because his voice is really missed and really important. But he would describe in ways that I, as someone who had tried to learn a bit about the scene, didn't know, the extent to which, just the sheer numbers of Black people who were there, who were around, who were involved when someplace like Berghain opened, when those parties that became Berghain first began. Mac was one of the bouncers, and these places that have been gentrified in our historical imagination and whitened in our historical imagination have these histories very recently. And so this, the idea that Berlin is a kind of normatively white place to which other people come is itself not true. And so that brings us to something that happened with this party that is presenting this event, which we should talk about because it's directly related to this question of safe space and safer space and how racialized bodies move through space. The cocktail used to be at a club called Griesmühle that closed due to aggressive real estate speculation, which then became part of another speculative real estate deal in another neighborhood, sort of one neighborhood south of Neukölln, Schöneweide. There was one cocktail there. They're no longer going to do events there because of an incident that happened a little more than a week ago, in which a club goer named Nicholas Rose, who is black, alleges that they were harassed and assaulted by bouncers, that the bouncers were enforcing the mask rules, which are obviously very important in the time of the pandemic, but were enforcing them in a racially biased way, and that at one point they were actually ejected from the club without their belongings. And Schöneweide, for people who know Berlin voting patterns, is a neighborhood that is one of the highest voting densities of the fascist AfD party. And so you have a club that has now stuck this, very, very fabulous and very cutely dressed young black queer person out onto the street in this neighborhood that could be very dangerous for them without their belongings, without a way to get home. And obviously that was completely unacceptable to everyone, and Cocktail and many other places have left, and this is still all kind of still all kind of playing out. And I do have to say, because of the state of German defamation law, that this person alleges that this happened. I believe those allegations, but that's what we have to say. But I think that illustrates the extent, and that especially in conversation with the history that we were talking about earlier, really illustrates the extent to which all of these things fit together, right? This ignored history, this insane speculative real estate situation, and then the racism of this city and of institutions.
Yeah, I guess obviously there are silences in history that are very grave and weigh down on why there's so much like strategic amnesia by not just the state, the German state, but also sometimes by the German people. And I'm glad that you pointed out, obviously, techno being formed by, established by Black people in Detroit is like something that not only the city, but so many people who enjoy techno music should owe allegiance to. That, and that Black erasure is very, very heavy in how we understand music, dance scenes, queer scenes, etc. But even moving to the present day, I think one of the erasures that happens is like the erasure of Black parties that do occur in the city. And that would not be without the communities of Afro-German people who've been organizing for decades. Like I think of ISD, the Initiative Schwarz mentioned in Deutschland. I think of the Dörfer, the Afro-German group. I think of like Each One Teach One, which is more educational, but it's still present. Soul Sisters, African diasporic group. There were during this summer various parties that were Afrocentric, like Flic de l'Afrique, that was also here in Berlin, and so forth and so. And then there are parties and that aren't advertised that people find ways of communing, dinner parties, etc. Like even in the past, you've been to some of my parties,
very good dinner parties.
where it was like 60, 70 people. You know, like I think parties and celebration and joy is so key and essential to people who have been oppressed, but who find a way and a meaning to carry on. That is something that people can't take away, even if they try to dehumanize Black folk or other people of color. Nevertheless, one thing I would say is that Germany is a racist society, and it really has to deal with not just anti-Blackness, but Islamophobia and anti-Asian sentiment and anti-Roma sentiment and its own anti-Semitism. So like the fact that there are people who say, X group of people are importing anti-Semitism into a country that specifically created and orchestrated one of the most sophisticated genocides. Like it's appalling.
Like they planned the Holocaust here.
Yeah.
Like you can take the subway there now.
Yeah, and even before, you know, and this is one of the things that I had to learn as a person living in this country, is that before there was the Holocaust here in Germany, there were concentration camps in Namibia and Tanzania, and that is not spoken about in the like public consciousness. But many of the Nazi scientists who were there also were on the continent, and so it becomes a situation whereby the dress rehearsal for fascism was colonialism, and then we're in 2021, it's a different context, but one of the things that we have to reckon with, even as people who live here who can't necessarily vote, is calling what it is. Like often people don't want to talk about Rasa and they don't use the R word because that's an American invention to them, or there isn't always a mechanism besides the reporting system. And like, I don't know, like, and also too, I can imagine that there's a lack of consciousness about intersectionality in some cases, where someone might be in a queer space and think, well, I'm queer and therefore I do not have other forms of bigotry, and that's not true. Like, and history has shown that, and the example that you gave has shown that. So there also needs to be more intentional practices of actually calling things as they are, and really doing better as a community, so that those incidents don't continue, and that person at the end of the day should get justice for being put out on the streets in Schoneweide with neo-Nazis running around like, you know, it's 1933. This is insane.
It's ridiculous. And I will also say that Cocktail has announced an initiative, or as part of an initiative to train explicitly queer and trans-friendly and anti-racist bouncers and staff, and to try to get folks doing that work who are sort of from and of those communities instead of relying on random German men, which is probably a good thing. To have a sort of final round of the conversation, or a final kind of lap of the conversation, I'd like to talk a little bit about, as we've gone deep into a lot of these histories, and we've gone deep into a lot of the issues that are coming up in the present day. But I think it would be inaccurate to not talk about some of the movements that are here, which I think both of you have already alluded to, which are actually being looked at by a lot of other cities as a model for how people can come together to fight gentrification, to fight speculative investment in the housing market. The most famous one is the current ballot initiative Deutsche Wohnen Co. Enteignen. If you're watching this and you can vote, please vote for it on September 26th. And if you have any time or ability to help out with the campaign, there's a link below the video right now where you can find out how to support it and find out how to join up. There are opportunities to get involved in multiple languages, and do not let your lack of German be an issue. This is actually a great way to get involved in something without having to have voting rights. There's actually a whole section of the campaign called Right to the City that's been scandalizing the number of people in this city who do not have voting rights, and who many of them are the people who are living through the very worst conditions in the housing market. And also those are often the people in the campaign pointing out, hey, even if we socialize all of this housing, there are even ads. There was an ad, I think, earlier this year for Stadt und Land, which is one of the Berlin like city-owned public housing authorities, which said we already have enough blacks and Arabs in the building. So like, part of the point of the campaign is like, this is also not, like, this is necessary but not sufficient. That, yes, no, literally, and then like, wir haben genug Schwarze und Araber or something like that. It was really, like, it's like, oh, you just wrote it.
Yeah. German racism direct.
Yeah, exactly.
In your face.
Klar.
Yeah.
Genau. No, but I guess I would just ask both of you to reflect a bit on these movements, on your involvement in them, what you see the exciting parts being, what you see the struggles being, and what you sort of think people can potentially do who are watching this and who are thinking that they want to step into being more active, what ways that they can do that are. Because I think a lot of people, I think especially a lot of the kind of well-meaning liberal people that you were talking about earlier, approach in a really ironic way their relationship to gentrification as a kind of consumer product. They want to buy something that reflects their guilt, or they want to buy something that reflects their desire to not be who they are. And if we move towards an understanding of, I mean, there are the number of people who are responsible for gentrification in Berlin is probably in the double or triple digits, and they have names and they have addresses, and there are ways that we can take action against them. I'm advocating nonviolent action, obviously, but there are ways that we can take action against these people and against these companies collectively.
Actually, in the history of the German left,
but
they have. Actually, just reading the news in Berlin, there are some parts of the left here who could do some
I know, but I and Cocktail de More are very much not advocating that anyone do that. Very, very much not. But the point I was trying to make is that what are some things that people can do as we maybe try to encourage people to move from thinking about how bad they feel about all of this to thinking about how they can actually stand in meaningful solidarity with communities that are being affected by this. It's a big question. So,
unlike the previous questions.
Yeah, no, exactly. These are all very small issues, and
I feel that. I feel I want to say something, but I feel like I should also apologize and put my intervention here in a very. Restricted, or I don't know even how English will fail me now. It's because I'm not so I guess there's better people than me that could advocate how to help better in being more involved in these local initiatives. What I can say is that we passed a long years probably with already losing hope, that such a solidarity campaign can even work, because I think part of our conversation here, part of this, in Arabic you say, you complain as much as, the complaint is as much as the love. Yeah, because if you weren't hoping to get anything, you wouldn't complain anyhow. So it's complaining about the city is also because we know somewhere could be because no matter how you speak about the city, no matter how it's disappointing or disillusioned, it still has one of the most unique histories of left-wing activism in the world. It still has this very unique solidarity movements. We talked about the demos, being in the street. It can surprise you in this way, And but this phase of being this very individualist phase that the city went through during the last few years, which seems very contradictory to the refugee influx that the city received. All of these contradictory movements we've been seeing, but this individualist phase and this very consumer way of treating the city in the meaning of, clubbing, bio food, and individual baby raising, and without, without being really engaged in where you live.
We've all been to Zuchtown, unfortunately.
So I think in this sense, this housing initiative, I think it's one of the most optimistic things I've witnessed here in the last few years. And it can truly be a lesson global-wise at this moment. And as a newcomer, I did sign, even though I don't vote, but I did sign. It was fascinating for me that there was so many young people collecting signatures all over the city. And we're waiting and hoping that this initiative will work. This is my little part in as a newcomer supporting the local.
Yeah, I guess the structural issues around housing can feel very daunting because of how much money is being put towards aggressive displacement of people, of like small businesses, of just the city, and the kind of pulse that it has kept it going and has made it so distinct from Paris and London and Prague.
Yeah.
And at the same time, like I can't lose hope, and I think that what Angela Davis's book Freedom is a Constant Struggle is a great reminder that you can't, freedom, like liberation isn't just going to come, you have to fight for it. And what gives me hope is that people are fighting for it, and people are collectively doing the work that you've been doing, Ben. And like you, I also like signed it, and I not only did I sign it, but I put it, posted things all over my building and put it on my neighbors' doors, and let them know what they can do, since actually they can, everyone in my building can vote except for my partner and myself. But yeah, I feel like in a way, this moment, and specifically, Corona and the pandemic, was so isolating, and it was so difficult to feel disconnected from the world that I knew and understood, and the closeness and intimacy that I had with so many friends and others. But at the same time, activism has helped to correct for that, insofar that it has become a way to say, okay, let's organize, let's figure out something bigger than this pandemic. And because so long as we have at least security in knowing that people are housed, that is such a relief for many people in this city, so that they can feel safe and comfortable, and that they are part of something bigger than the flesh that they contain. But I would say for anyone who is ever thinking about organizing, just, learning the history, educating yourself as much as possible, organizing on a simple level, tweeting if you do that, or social media, and then just agitating, like questioning the authority that assumes that we should accept things as they are, when in fact it serves those 20 or 30 people who own most of the land in this city. So yeah, it's a question of like constantly working towards things collectively together, and really maintaining that hope, because otherwise, why are we here if we didn't hope and dream and think beyond ourselves? Yeah.
Well, thank you for that. I think that's a really great note to end on. I want to thank both of you so much for joining us. I want to thank Giovanni and Giacomo and everyone at Cocktail d'Amore for proposing this event, and of course Tim and the wonderful people at Schwutz for hosting us at short notice and for filming us, and to all of you for viewing. So thank you so much, and please enjoy the rest of the online events that are available right here. Thanks.
Thank you.